Hello, it's Toaster Party, and today I'm going to talk about what my picks are for the 5 best Wilds of Eldraine cards for Pauper. Starting things off with number 5, Johann Stopgap. For 3 generic and a blue, you get a sorcery with Bargain. That being, you may sacrifice an artifact, enchantment, or token as you cast the spell. And the spell costs 2 generic less if it is bargained for. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, draw a card. So what makes this card interesting is the bargaining mechanic. Because in Pauper, a lot of the times, it's actually better to have the ability stapled on to sacrifice one of these permanent types, because a lot of them get value when they hit the yard. But with that said, there is one downside, that being that this is a sorcery, and usually you'd want this kind of effect on an instant. Let's move forward now to number 4, Hopeful Vigil. For 1 generic and a white, you get an enchantment that says when it enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 white knight creature token with Vigilance, and when this is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, scry 2, you can also pay 2 generic and white to sacrifice it. So there's 2 ways that this card is interesting. One being in the type of deck where you're blinking or bouncing it, where you can then keep playing it to get additional value off of it. Or the other place where it is interesting is in a deck that's using a lot of the bargaining mechanic, where you get the value off of playing it and then get additional value based off sacrificing it. Even in the worst case scenario where you have to sacrifice it manually to its own effect, it still isn't terrible to be able to have that option. Let's move forward now to number 3, Slumber and Keep Guard. For 1 white mana, you get a creature human knight that says when an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, scry 1. You can also pay 2 generic and a white to give it +1/+1 until end of turn for each enchantment you control. There's also a 1/1. So there's 2 different decks that I would think this would be interesting in. One being something like Boggles, where you're playing a ton of enchantments already, and this just gets you additional card selection, and also becomes a threat in and of itself, where you have a ton of enchantments on the field and start swinging with it, even if you don't have anything enchanted to it. And the second place where it could be interesting is in a deck that just has a lot of enchantments that isn't Boggles, where you can play this down on your first turn, and then every turn afterwards you're getting just additional card selection, and it becomes a late game threat that actually can do a ton of damage for a very low investment. Let's move forward now to number 2, Rowans Grim Search. For 2 generic and a black, you get an instant with Bargain that says, if this spell was bargained for, look at the top 4 cards of your library, then put up to 2 of them back on top of your library in any order, and the rest into your graveyard. You draw 2 cards, and then you lose 2 life. So this is a very powerful card advantage spell, where you get a ton of card selection from it, because you're pretty much always going to be casting it for its bargain cost, meaning you're getting value off whatever you're sacrificing, and the fact that you don't have to pick any of the 4 cards if you do not want to, meaning that you are digging 6 cards deep instead of just digging 4 cards deep. This is just a very good piece of card selection and card advantage. Moving now to number 1, Hopeless Nightmare. For 1 black, you get an enchantment that says, when Hopeless Nightmare enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life. And when Hopeless Nightmare is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, scry 2, you can also pay 2 generic and a black to sacrifice Hopeless Nightmare. So out of the ETB effect enchantments, this one is the far better of the 2. That being that it both is causing your opponent to lose cards in hand, and even in scenarios where them being out of cards is the thing, you're still making them lose life. So this is just a very good card all around, in that it's both giving you card advantage, card selection, and it's also a burn spell. So in scenarios where you're playing like Blackburn, this is probably just an instant 4 of. And there's probably a whole number of other decks that would want this kind of effect, that are especially those that are using the bargain mechanic. Well, that's all I had to say. Thank you all for watching. I hope you leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope you all have an excellent day.